Hello everyone and my dear subscribers. I was going to show this group I made at the end of the video, but the video got too long after I made it, so I just decided to put this as like an intro so you can have a look and then watch the video. Lostark in Korea had just undergone a patch where the gold you can earn from main gold source, weekly legion / abyss raid, is only limited to 6 characters per account. This was pretty big decision Smilegate made to curtail the massive gold production across the server in order to handle gold inflation issue. I was unhappy at first because the character slots cost money to unlock and I have several unlocked. Well, what can I do? It was their decision and it's not like I'm gonna quit the game. In Korea we call this brain leakage. Addiction for the game is messing with our brain to think clearly. Anyways, when people ask me for class recommendations until now, I had like, give them a try and choose the one you like kind of mentality. Didn't actually say that, but just saying it was the kind of mentality I had. However, the gold limit patch got me thinking, this will not be the case anymore because those characters we make for fun might not pay back as much as we invest into them. Because before, even if the classes weren't all that fun after all, at least they pay back with gold to support for my main or make another character. Okay, wait. Let's stop here for a moment and point this out real quick. You might be thinking 6 characters? Isn't that still a lot? Does this guy have a life? I actually do run a company, and yes, I have a life. But I like Arcasia just as much as Seoul Korea, my other life. I want you to know, Lostark started off with like 12 or 13 characters during the OBT I think, and they now have 22. Do you think you can resist when they introduce Lancemaster, Reaper, Arcana, Artist, and Destroyer to the west? Okay, maybe you can count out Destroyer, but guys, Genderlock Berserker, Gender like Sharpshooter, the Weather Lady. When you look at intro for the specialists in the class selection, you can see the Easter egg of specialist classes to come. Female Berserker. When they keep coming out with classes that are fresh, newly designed, with new effects and skills, with a level up boost, 6 is not enough. I know we don't know for sure if the 6 character thing is going to be applied to the West, but it's happened for Korea and it can happen to the West as well. So it comes down to this. I can't tell you to make several characters and give them a try. I never did, but I no longer have that mentality. I felt a need to properly introduce the classes as much as I can using the data and resources I have, my personal opinions, and then you can filter out the useful info. I mean, yeah, all DPS classes are viable and there won't be much of an issue clearing raids, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all pleasant experiences. And what I want to do here is to provide you with as many information as possible which contains data, but some of my personal opinion as well. Oh, by the way, my nickname is Shipmlier because I picked the shittiest classes as main, so I can tell you my experience and you can just do the opposite and you will be fine. First, I want to point out that in Korea, what we call tier is heavily dependent on how other people perceive the class. Because how other people perceive the class decides whether you can instantly get into raid parties or having to search and get denied and waste 2 hours or more just to get into the parties. For example, when Cuckoo Satan Legion Raid came out in Korea, melee classes had a difficult time finding parties because during the raid, these 2 balls would drop with some sort of AoE which fills up your gauge, which then turns you into a clown. And these balls were hard to break at just level. So everybody was looking for a long range class who doesn't have to step into the AoE to break these balls. This isn't the case anymore since people are overgeared and found out a way to break these balls without gaining too much gauge, but back then I had a really difficult time. Yes, this is my own story with my destroyer. Okay, maybe that was more of a character performance issue than perception of a class. But Reapers are now having a hard time finding jobs because of their heavy reliance on back attack and wimpy defense stats. This is a toll. People voted on the classes they don't want to party up for a bullshit. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is actually a thing. I could laugh about Reaper getting 34% vote and because some of the reasons are kind of funny too, but I'm sure the Reaper mains can't laugh it off. There's a high probability that most of these Reapers are stressing. Plus, I can't laugh either because Destroyer is like right there. And of course, you won't have to worry about Reaper just yet, as NAU won't have this class from the start, and a Brillshoot won't be out for a long time. I just wanted to present an example about how people's stereotype of a class can have an impact on users' experience in the game. So, what is a good class? A class you have fun with? Sure, this is true until you start getting denied by raid parties. But then again, that toll I just showed you can change at one snap of a finger of the developers. Especially since they announced that year 2022 will be a year of class balancing. So how do I explain which class is a good class in a way that you can understand watching this video from a novice point of view? I'll be focusing on these points. 1. Basic concept of the class. 2. Their synergies, meaning their buffs and contributions to the party. 3. Difficulty and the return they get for that penalty. And I might add a little history of the class, how they've been treated during the past 3 years. I'll try to explain in an organized manner as much as I can, and try to include how they perform in tier 1 as well, because that's the first impression you will get in the West. But please do note that it can get confusing for you because most of you probably haven't even played the game, and a lot of my thoughts are coming from in-game experience. Also, note that I'm only going to talk about the classes that are there for the Western release, and I won't be talking about support classes. If you want to know if it's okay to main a support class, I'd say yes because they have no trouble finding parties and they just got a damage buff for solo plays. Oh, and before we really begin, I need to explain about the universal bonus of head attack having 20% damage and 10% stagger boost, and back attack with 5% damage and 10% crit chance boost. Having said that, let's start with the warrior class. Berserker. Top tier when it comes down to DPS, as it should be. I think the class is well balanced when it comes down to the design and concept of the class. A giant sword swinging madman. They may feel a bit sluggish. They do have longer animations with their skills. They're not as tanky as other warrior classes, but they get enough DPS in return. Wait, the Madness class engraving build is pretty tanky ironically, plus the Identity Berserker mode gives him 15% attack and movement speed buff. Berserkers don't really rely too much on positional attacks, while it is better to get the back attack as they have few back attack skills. In regards to the party contribution, some people have an issue with their synergy, which is they have to make a choice between the self buff of 30% or party buff of 12% from a skill tripod, which is like a perk. Most of the berserkers were taking the 30% self buff, and some of the other classes weren't really happy with this. However, Smalget did indirectly mention about the synergies that are causing hate on a class, and that they're going to fix this, and we all know this refers to Berserker. Overall, I think Berserker is a worthy class to main if you like giant swords and badass effects, because there is also plenty of return in DPS. Next up, Gunlancer. Gunlancers have almost never fell off their royal throne over the past 3 years. I think they may be getting a bit much DPS despite how tanky they are. His party synergy is enemy defense break of 12%, damage boost of 3%, plus head and back attack boost of 9%. On top of that, he can provide shield to the allies, which can also cleanse from enemy debuffs. A gunlancer has two builds, commonly called the red build and the blue build, identified from the color of the skills they use. The red build is relatively a lot less tankier than the blue build, but is still the tankiest than all other DPS classes. The red build uses a gunlance to attack with two main DPS skills which are super bursty. However, if you fail to attack enemy on the head, the damage is reduced down to about half. Getting head attacks won't be a problem during tier 1, as the taunt skill will turn their heads towards you. But when tier 3 legion raids come out, the taunt will not work on bosses from certain stages, making it more difficult to get head attacks, which is why there was a notable shift from the red build to blue build just recently. On top of that, the red build does not have any mobility. This is as much mobility you'll get with the red build. On the other hand, the blue build can face tank a lot more than the red build and is not dependent on head attacks. But you won't be seeing much critical hits as blue gunlancers take specialty and agility stats. Actually, I think one of the reasons why gunlancers shifted over from the red build to blue build is because of this skill. The latest raid has floor tile based mechanics which you have to be mobile to survive. If you want to know the specifics about gunlancers builds, I have both builds in this video. You can check out the video linked above. Anyways, gunlancer is definitely a class worth maining due to the nature of their design and concept. They will not have trouble finding parties, even if they take few nerfs here and there in the future. They can save you a lot of time as well as potions. Next is a fighter class. Wardancer, aka Battlemaster in Korea. First of all, their synergy is top notch, probably one of the most preferred by party members besides gunlancer. Their party synergy is crit chance of 18%, 16% of movement speed increase, and 8% attack speed increase. Their own skill cools can seem long, and having to auto attack during the skill downtime at the beginning stages of the game can kinda make it boring, but you can reduce this later on with agility stats, runes, and tier 3 gear effects. They have their own crit buff on top of the party crit buff, so you can take some stats away from crit to agility. The funny thing about wardancers is, even if they get nerfed here and there, the users will study and find out a build which puts them up in top tier for DPS. They have a couple different builds which are all viable, hence the reason for a variety of builds in the top 100 ranked users. Wardancer is definitely a class worth maining. Striker, however, the genderlock version of Wardancer, the meta build which is called the Death Blow, sorry if I'm mistaken, but it requires them to rely heavily on back attacks with two major DPS skills. They share similar party synergy as Wardancer. How they differ from Wardancer is that strikers have to invest most of the stats on specialty and then critical. So the strikers will play a lot slower than Wardancer, possibly one of the slowest in the game unless you play the off-meta build. I think the off-meta build is also viable, but it does have lower DPS ceiling than the meta build. This balance will not change in my opinion because the Deathblow build plays slower with more conditions than the off-meta class engraving, and it should have higher DPS ceiling. So strikers in general is not an easy class. Having to smell the enemy's ass constantly for back attacks can be stressful, but are they rewarded with enough DPS? I think so, yes. But can I confidently recommend the class as a main to somebody? No, I don't think so. But if your heart tells you to play the class, then go ahead. I don't recommend the class, but at the same time, I won't stop anyone from playing this class. Let's move on to Scrapper. I'm a bit intimidated to express my opinions about this class because they have a huge community who unite really well. Well, here it is. I think the class is very well balanced, period. Just kidding. The reason why they have a huge population is because when the M-Story game gate happened in Korea and the flocks of refugees from that game came over to Lostark, they were all asking streamers and people around them for classes to pick. Well, a lot of people recommended gunlancer and scrapper because of their general performance and because they just don't lack anything in specific. The class is very newbie friendly. Scrapper is tanky, ranks 3rd in health and defense coefficients above berserker. They can dash twice in 2 different directions, making it easier to dodge enemy attacks or get their backs. I think with slight buff on the duration of self buff on one of their skills, the DPS for shock training build can be very high. People who are complaining about the lower DPS ceiling with the agility taijutsu build are just being babies. The class, however, is heavily dependent on back attacks and there is a bit of difficulty. But she's very reliable to have as a party member because it's not easy to see them die during raids. I won't stop you from maining her. Moving over, Soulfist. Ah yes, my ex-main. I've mentioned this several times in my past videos that I started off playing the game from the OBT as a Soulfist, and the reason why I chose Soulfist is of course the Spirit Bomb. There's a couple of other reasons like the mobility and it being like a hybrid of long range and close range combat style class, or at least that was what was mentioned in the Soulfist trailer back then. Oh yeah, by the way, don't let Lostark's official class trailer fool you because half of the skills from the showcase you don't even use like ever. Anyways, back to the Spirit Bomb. During season 1 there was a short period, like you know how in history there's always that one empire that rose to power real quick and fell right off? Well, in Lostark there was a period when a party of Beba-Buggy, Be for Battlemaster, Pa for Bard, Ba for Berserker, and Ki for Gigongsa, which is Soulfist in Korean, were so strong together as a party, we were just skipping phases of raid bosses. Well, from those 4 classes, the Soulfist fell right off real quick. Yeah, just a Soulfist, probably due to the ridiculous damage from the Spirit Bomb. Soulfist have been getting nerfed for almost 2 years since then, and here's the result. They just got nerfed again last balance patch too. Bottom line, her damage is too RNG and dependent on her Spirit Bomb. The off-meta build, which is the build I'm playing right now, could be easily replaced with wardancer, a much better version. I wouldn't recommend her as main, but if you just have to play her as an alt and play the Spirit Bomb build just for fun. Now the gunners. Gunslinger's top tier DPS class in Korea at the moment. They have great party synergy of constant 10% crit buff, which is favored by a lot of other classes. Absolutely amazing class, thumbs up if you want to main it. I mean, before Master of Striking, Engraving, and Gunslinger was added to the game, head attack and back attack classes were the ones putting out damage. Well, Gunslinger is like a genetically evolved class with their superpower DNA, along with Master of Striking, Engraving, Spoon, freeing them from positional attacks. Just be aware that because it's doing too good right now, if anything were to happen to the class in the upcoming balance patches, it won't be a buff for Gunslinger. Other than that, as population shows, the character is worth investing, meaning it's fun as an alt also, it's got everything. However, its counterpart, Deadeye, the original design of Gunslinger, is not doing so well. I personally think, and I'm sure many would agree, that the concept of Deadeye should make him the strongest class when it comes down to DPS. The class is one of the squishiest. They have to get the enemies back, and after they get the back, they have to get close because their shotguns do more damage when they're close, and when you don't get close enough, you'll get pushed back from the shotgun's recoil. It's seriously one of the most difficult classes to play, and they just aren't getting enough in return, which is the reason why their population remains at the bottom throughout the levels. The class did recently receive a notable buff, and people were surprised because everyone thought Smilegate just forgot that such class existed. 2022 is looking brighter for them, but until they get another buff, I don't recommend them as main maybe as an alt as they are an attractive class. Artillerist. The class is very reliable when it comes down to survivability in raids due to his fat self-shields. It is not easy to see him in the MVP screen with most damage dealt, but makes contributions to the party with constant enemy defense break of 12% and stagger boost of 20%. Oh yeah, they make me sick in PvPs. Period. I don't know, I just don't have much to say about the class. How's Artillerist? It's a good class. That's about it. Sharpshooter. It's not the strongest class in the beginning, but they'll shine later on when raids get more difficult and when you can call the hawk its identity more often. The level 3 class engraving Deadly Assault gives 40% damage boost on your skills for 8 seconds, which can really cap its DPS ceiling. The second companion basically calls the hawk, and the hawk sort of stays with you to do some sustained damage. Sharpshooters are non-positional class as well, and they can pretty much freely deal damage from close to long range. And yes, they were born with Master of Striking Spoon as well. With their synergy, the enemy takes 6% more damage constantly. The thing about this class is, for 2 years after launch, the class had a really long dark period of being one of the weakest classes in the game. Well, last summer they received a whopping 20% damage buff on all of their skills. That just tells you how weak they were, and I want to give major props to the users who stayed with the class for all those years. And since we know they just got buffed recently after 2 years, I would like to make a careful assumption that Smilegate won't be nerfing them for a while. It's a good class in general, not too difficult, and they get plenty of DPS in return. Let's move on over to Assassins. Shadow Hunter. The playstyle of the class will vary a lot depending on the class engraving. There's a transformation engraving, and then there's a transformation suppression engraving. A transformed Shadow Hunter is stagger free, meaning bosses' attacks won't knock you or won't stagger you, while of course you take the damage. However, in order for transformation engraving to be really effective, you need at least level 2 of the engraving because it gives you 15% crit chance buff when you're in the demon form, 30% crit chance at level 3, and at level 1 no crit chance buff at all. So without the transformation engraving, turning into the demon form only allows you to use the demon skills and then 20% movement speed buff. During tier 1, level 3 can be achieved by equipping 2 of the engraving books with 6 points each and acquiring 3 points from the accessories. Party synergy wise, the Shadow Hunter synergy skill is only available when in human form, which is 12% damage increase with 30 seconds cooldown. Meaning her synergy skills might not be available when there is a burst DPS window. The suppression engraving is known to have lower DPS ceiling than the transformation build. However, if I were to compare the two engravings at level 1, I think the suppression engraving is more effective as it provides buff to your regular skills other than the purple ones. The purple ones fill up your gauge and the regular skills uses a gauge for buffed attacks. The class is designed to be a pure DPS class, and it is non-positional class, putting her on the easier side of the classes to play, and yet I don't think it's quite up there in the tier compared to her other assassin buddy Deathblade in terms of DPS cap. Deathblade's party synergy is almost constant back attack and head attack buff of 12%, along with 15% movement speed and 20% of attack speed buff. The design of the class makes you spend most of the stat points on specialty and then critical for highest DPS ceiling, so the class can be well paired up with a class like Deadeye who can help each other out. Deadeye with crit buff and Blade with the back attack buff. Deathblades heavily depends on back attacks to cap their DPS ceiling, but their skill design and mobility makes it relatively easy and even fun to position themselves at enemies' backs. Both class engravings for Deathblade are currently OP, however the remaining energy class engraving is used more throughout due to less constraining use of her identity. With the remaining energy engraving, you just have to collect the orbs and then use them for self buff. whereas the burst engraving is basically stacking after stacking for one big butt slice on the back of the enemy, and you'll be able to see some interesting numbers. They actually reworked the burst engraving not too long ago, and the overall damage output from an experienced player goes off the charts. However, you have to accumulate knowledge of the boss's patterns and know when to use the burst skill, because the stacking is time gated, and when boss flies around for a team mechanic in the middle of stacking can result in serious DPS loss. Overall, the class definitely has returned for the work you put in, and getting the back position is relatively easy compared to other back attack classes. So if you want to play an assassin class, I definitely recommend Deathblade. And lastly, let's move on to the one and only mage DPS class, Sorceress. I'll be honest, I don't do mage classes. I just don't. I prefer melee classes' direct contact and the impact effects with the enemy. So I'm going to tell you in advance that I don't have personal experience on the class, but I can't just leave it out. So I'm going to explain the class based on my observations, contents, and studies of the class. Her synergy is pretty much constant 6% damage buff on the allies, meaning she's basically a pure DPS class. The ignition build of the sorceress's DPS ceiling is pretty crazy high at the moment, even after the almost instant nerf after the release. The damage is understandable as the build gives up on agility and is mostly focused on specialty. Her major DPS skills are the 3 casting skills, which can take a while for her to cast, and the meteors to drop on the bosses. I feel like she's definitely going to need the fast cast engraving over the grudge engraving during tier 1 stages, as her skills might feel like forever to cast and hit the enemy without the fast cast perks. Otherwise, she does have an option to go with the instant cast skill tree, but like how Lostark works, it will take away some portion of the damage compared to the casting build. Her other build, the reflex engraving, makes her more mobile and turns her into more of a sustained DPS rather than burst DPS type. Although the ignition casting build is more dominant in the top 100 ranked players, the reflex build is also seen pretty frequently, like 1 out of 5 users. Either build is known to be viable, and from those 2 class engravings, they have the flexibility to use either instant cast or the casting perks of the major DPS skills. Meaning she has a few options when it comes down to class engravings, skill trees, builds, and etc. And they all do quite well in the raids. Bottom line, super OP class at the moment, at par with Gunslinger in terms of DPS, of course, depending on the pilot. And that covers all the classes. Before we get into a conclusion, Smilegate did mention during the Winter Luon that they have a few classes that are showing some high numbers in terms of DPS in their inside data. He also said that these will be taken care of, and he probably means nerf on the classes. I would like to make a careful assumption that these classes include Gunslinger, Wardancer, Sorceress, and Deathblade. I don't think they'll be nerfed to the point where they are unplayable, but I do think they will be nerfed to a certain point. That ends my video. Feel free to leave comments or questions and I'll do my best to reply. Thanks for watching, see you next time. Bye bye.